Have you ever had the experience in which you felt like life pulled the rug under your feet and you were just about to fall flat on your face with no place to hold on to? I have had this experience a few times in my life, but the very first one was the most difficult one. I am originally from Brazil and I never thought about moving into the United States. But when I was really young, I was really passionate about sports. And so I decided to join the diving team. And I was so passionate about the sport that I would be the first one in the pool. I would be the last one to leave. Sometimes I would go to the pool on Sundays until my coach prohibited me from going to the pool on Sundays. He told me, go to the beach, go to the park, but don't come to the pool on Sundays. And I believe because of my passion and devotion to the sports, I was given the opportunity to come here to the United States to train with the full athletic scholarship, and I was able to represent Brazil in 2 Olympic Games. It taught me about discipline and it taught me about perseverance, just staying focused on the path. Now, shortly after my diving career came to an end, I had an experience that brought the biggest sense of anxiety that I have ever experienced in my whole life. And it all started when the engine of my car blew up and I didn't have money to replace the engine or buy a new car. So I had to let go of the job that I had. To make things worse, I was renewing my working visa through the mail and somehow my application got lost. So I became temporarily illegal with no job, no car, very little money in the bank and no support system around. My whole family was in Brazil and I was pretty much alone here in a foreign country. And all of a sudden I started panicking. And I was just being introduced to spirituality and the importance of meditation. So I decided to go to the beach to try to meditate, to see if I could calm down because the level of anxiety I was experiencing, it was too intense for me. And I remember being at the beach trying to meditate, but I just couldn't. My mind was like extremely busy in scary thoughts. So at one point I just started crying. I started like pleading God for help. I had no idea how to get myself out of that situation. So I just cried and I pleaded and I prayed. And on my way back home, I was led to pick up a newspaper to see if I could find a new job. And instead I found this advertisement of a spiritual healing center offering free spiritual healing sessions. And since I was unemployed and it was for free, I was so excited. So I went in the next day and to my surprise, in my very first session, I began to experience this profound sense of peace that I just couldn't believe it. It felt like I was taking a vacation of my problems for that 15-minute session. And I remember just sitting down, receiving the healing session, looking out at the window and thinking to myself, how could it be possible that my whole world is falling apart and yet in this very moment I'm experiencing peace? I could not understand it, but I liked it so much that I decided to keep going to the center on a daily basis. And like with the diving, I was the first one in the center, I was the last one to leave. I wanted to learn everything about it. I wanted to receive as much as possible because it was helping me to maintain a level of calm in the midst of my storm. A few weeks later, I received this call from this professional diving company. They were looking for divers to do diving shows at the Miami Aquarium, and they asked me if I wanted the job. It turned out that the job was paying me twice as much as I was making before, and I had to work a lot less. The biggest lesson that I learned from this storm, this problem that appeared to be this storm, is that if we can find peace in the midst of a storm, that inner peace has the capacity to calm the storms in our behalf. So looking back at it, this huge storm, so to speak, it changed the course of my life completely, and it put me on a path in which I was about to discover my new passion in life, which is the spiritual path. The understanding of the spiritual laws that govern this physical universe, so that I may learn how to put myself in harmony with it. Now, just because I learned this important lesson, it didn't keep me from experiencing more storms in my life. But with each storm, I learned a new lesson, and I realized that I was able to become better off after the storm. And I have a question for you. Do you think that the way you respond to the storms of life will have an impact on how long the storm will stay? If the storm is going to be dissipated, or if you will attract more storms like that in your life? When we begin to understand the laws of creation, and most importantly, the laws of attraction, we begin to realize that our response to those things that trigger us, or our response to the storms of life, has everything to do with how long the storm will stay, if it would be dissipated at all, or if we will attract more storms. And I'm just going to give you an example here. If something happens in my life and I become angry, I become resented, I feel myself to be a victim of that circumstances, I begin to blame everything and everyone, and I stay in that low vibrational resistance mode for a prolonged period of time, what happens is I am sending a specific vibration out into the universe, and this being a vibrational universe, the universe will match my vibration by attracting to me more events that will trigger the response. So the key here is, how do we respond to those situations in our lives? The founder of that spiritual healing center in which I became a part of, when he was in his early stages of spiritual development, he began to practice to see the storms as blessings in disguise. He began to practice by seeing that the storm is happening for him and not against him. So his attitude towards the difficulties that he faced was precisely what caused him to be able to elevate himself after each storm and become eventually a master of his own spiritual movement. So we may not be able to control our reaction to an event, but if we can take a pause and take a step back with the understanding that how I respond will have everything to do with how my future creations will unfold, then we can begin to practice making better choices on the present moment when faced with those triggers, and change the course of our lives. Now, everything sounds beautiful, and when we understand the law of attraction intellectually, that does not guarantee that we will be able to demonstrate it. And what I've learned, especially at Unity, I remember when I was taking one of those classes, and it talked about chemicalization, that when you're being introduced with new thoughts and new beliefs, but you have all this conditioning that you have experienced through decades in your life, that it runs deep at a subconscious level, your subconsciousness will be the driving force of your responses. So when you are introduced to a new belief, it will take the consistent remembrance of that belief in order to begin to have a cleansing of your conditioning at a subconscious level so that it stops being an intellectual understanding and becomes a conviction of the heart. And it actually reminded me of the co-founder of Unity, Myrtle Fillmore, when she was first introduced to the idea in the midst of her trial and tribulation and storm, which she was actually given a few months to live due to her tuberculosis. When she was introduced to a new belief or a new way of seeing things, which is, I am a daughter of this beautiful, powerful, and potent energy, which we call God, therefore I do not inherit any illness. When she was first introduced to that idea, it did not cause an immediate change in her life or her situation, but it was the daily practice of reminding herself of that. It was the daily practice of affirming wholeness, affirming health, affirming her oneness and her divine sonship with the presence of God within herself, that she was able to eventually make that new idea to become a conviction in her heart. And that is when everything changed in her life. So when we have that understanding that my response is key to my future development, and most of my responses are taking place at a subconscious level due to my programming and conditioning, then we begin to see that the pathway moving forward is to begin to create daily habits that will support a new way of seeing things, a new belief system, and a new way of responding to the events of life. I was reading this book called Atomic Habits, in which the author will say that by beginning to implement tiny little habits in your life, positive habits, and you begin to accumulate those little habits, but you do it continuously, in the long run, it will cause this huge transformation. So what I've learned is that it's very hard for us to experience peace in the midst of a storm if we are not used to experiencing or looking for peace on a daily basis. One of the lessons of the Course in Miracles says that it's like this: I choose above all things the peace of the present moment. So it inspires us to look for that peace on a daily basis, so by the time you're faced with the trigger or you're faced with the storm, it will be easier for us to come to that place of peace and have a different reaction to the events of life. So to make a long story short, if you're faced with the difficulty in your life, just remember that your response, your reaction will be key to your future creations. And when you begin to incorporate on your daily life new beliefs about yourself, perhaps even introduce the practice of meditation and mindfulness. In my latest storm, which was during the pandemic, I just felt like my whole world was again going to fall apart. I decided to become determined to practice meditation and mindfulness more often, like on a daily basis. And after a couple of years, I realized that what the practice of consistent meditation do for us is to help us separate ourselves from our thoughts. So here is the thought, and here I am the observer of the thought. And by creating that separation, it's easier for us to realize that now I can choose. I can choose to be immersed on that thought, or I can choose to let that thought go and focus my attention into something else. And I also like to train on a daily basis to look for things that I can show appreciation for, even the most mundane things. Like, I appreciate the fact that I have legs and I can walk. I appreciate that I have a car that I can take me from A to B. I appreciate the fact that I have pets in my house and I love them. I appreciate the fact that I have beautiful friends and they nourish my soul. When you begin to practice finding peace, when you begin to practice the art of choosing where you want to put your focus of attention at, when you begin to practice the art of paying attention to things that makes you feel inspired and uplifted, that's when an inner transformation begins to take place at a deeper level, which will help you respond better to any situation in your life. And the way you respond will determine what kind of future you will create. I hope you had enjoyed this message. If you like this video, please feel free to share it with your friends. Having said that, from my heart to your heart, I see you in love and light. Thanks for watching. Namaste.